false evidence appearing real. When you analyze fear, you understand that fear and anger are two sides of the same coin, and it really is false evidence appearing real. Really, when it comes to fear, what is the antithesis of fear? It's love. Fear is really a self-centered emotion. True fear is really when your life is being threatened and you have to burst into action right away to protect yourself or your family, and you get a visceral response. The blood rushes to your extremities. Your vision focuses in on what it's fearing, the object of the threat. Now, we all have fears and we all experience different kinds of fears. And some of the fears are actually confused with anxiety. Anxiety is more of a dull, like fear is something good to get you to spur into action to save your life. It'll give you an adrenaline rush to run away really fast or to climb something that you wouldn't normally think you could climb. The fear response itself is a very important, vital function for the human body to have, for the human organism to have. So the topic of fear is a very interesting topic because you have different levels of fear. But all the way at the top is you have the fear of basically your life being threatened. So say you're on a skyscraper and somebody pushes you off. The minute you start falling, you feel a lot of fear because your life is in jeopardy. If you're walking through the woods and you see a mountain lion hissing at you, and you're like walking backwards trying to scare it away, and it's coming for you, that fear has your senses focused. You know, you might be able to pull off some miracles in that situation. You never know what you're capable of when your adrenaline is flowing, right? So fear is there for a reason. You may be able to scale a tree and just climb the side of a cliff and do all kinds of amazing things. But a lot of the fear that we hear about today is more of an anxiety. It's more of a worry about the future or a worry about paying bills. And, you know, sometimes people have a fear of being out in public in large crowds, or it could be anything. Now, even though some of the fears may be irrational to some, they're real for that person right then and there in that situation. You got to think about it like this. There might have been things in the past that you were afraid of that you're no longer afraid of now. When you were a child, you may have been afraid of the dark and you might have grown out of that fear. So the whole point is understanding relieves the fear or the irrational fear that we feel. There may be certain things that make us afraid. I mean, everybody has something different that brings up a little bit of fear in them. What am I afraid of right now? I think my number one fear right now is like not being able to pay my bills or not being able to live a certain way. Like, I'll say this, when I drive and I see like a lot of the homeless people on the side of the streets and, you know, with standing there with a sign, that's like one of my biggest fears. One of my biggest fears is to be out in the cold holding a sign. Like, I don't ever want it to be to that point. I'll do whatever it takes to not be standing out in the cold holding a sign. That's like one of my biggest fears. I'd say I'm glad that I have that fear, because if I didn't, you know, I might end up being one of those people out in the cold, standing there with a sign and just accepting it. So I'm glad I have that fear. I'm actually, you know, afraid of carnival rides now. When I was younger, I could go on all kinds of roller coasters and carnival rides, but the older I got, I started to get scared, you know. And then I saw a video of one of those rides throwing people off, like the pieces were coming off as it was going, and those people were plunging to their death. So I'm like, wow, I'm actually glad I'm afraid of rides now. I don't want to get on a ride and have some crazy stuff happen like that. So fear, I mean, there's all different kinds of fears. You fear of the future, fear of what people are going to think about you if you make a video and post it online, or fear of public speaking. I think a lot of this fear that we hear about nowadays I think it really stems from a lack of self-respect and a lack of self-love. And you really can't recognize that until you look further into it. It's very difficult to notice. So let's think about some of the things that help people overcome their fears. You have understanding. When you're a child and you're afraid of the dark, when you get older, you understand that the dark is not really going to hurt you and there's no monster under the bed that's going to get you. So you're no longer afraid of the dark. When people are first afraid of public speaking, when they do it a certain amount of times, the fear goes away. I mean, it doesn't totally go away. There's still a little bit of nerves, but ultimately they become more comfortable being uncomfortable, so to speak. And I think the older that you get, the less things you fear because your understanding increases. It's lack of understanding that keeps the fear festering. So when a person seeks understanding, that's an act of self-love. You have to love yourself to want to seek more understanding, to want to enlighten yourself. Because what's the purpose of seeking knowledge? You seek knowledge to want to better yourself. You want to better yourself so you can overcome fear. Oftentimes, you want to better yourself so that you can get to a certain level, and the byproduct is eradicating the fear. So, focusing on self-improvement and getting stronger mentally, physically, spiritually is always going to alleviate feelings of fear. Now, even think about fear from a visceral perspective. Let's take fighting, for example, boxing or martial arts or what have you. When you first go to a martial arts class or a boxing gym, and you don't really know too much, you're practicing, they're showing you some things, you're hitting the bag, and then they say, okay, you're going to get in the ring and you're going to spar that guy. But that guy has been practicing for a few years, and he looks pretty good. You're going to feel a little intimidated. You're going to feel fearful because you think that guy's going to school you, basically, and he's probably going to knock you down and humiliate you. But that's a natural fear because you're inexperienced. But when you improve, you keep going to the gym every day, you spar, you get better and better and better. Now, there's no fear when you step into the ring to spar with anybody. There's no fear at all. It completely goes away. It's the same thing with anything in life. Lack of flexibility. Lack of mental flexibility. Physical flexibility and mental flexibility go together. Because try this out. Do some yoga. Do some stretches. And then after you do your yoga and your stretches, you lay on the ground and you meditate. It's called Shavasana, where you calm your mind, you deepen your breathing, you slow everything down, and you try to empty out your mind and you just relax. Now, when you get up from that exercise, the physical flexibility and agility and sturdiness, everything that you improved physically with that exercise, you start to feel the same thing mentally. Now you feel more calm. So, like, for instance, if you've been sitting all day and you've been driving in traffic all day and somebody cuts you off, you're going to feel more rigid. You're going to be more prone to lash out at that person. But if you've been doing yoga all morning, then you get in the car, all peaceful. Somebody cuts you off. Okay. You're not as angry. And what's on the other side of anger? It's fear. What are you afraid of? Read the book Power versus Force because it explains a lot of these concepts deeper than I am right now. But essentially, all the emotions run on a scale. And if you think about it, we're never euphoric all the time. Our moods will fluctuate naturally. During the course of the day, they fluctuate. They even fluctuate with how the weather is. So, you gotta be able to ride the waves of life. It's like you're on a surfboard. You catch your balance when you're on the wave. You're able to catch your balance. Sometimes you might fall off, but you always get back on and ride the wave again. So, by practicing self love, seeking knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, when you get to a certain level of knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, fear is no longer a worry. Fear is no longer an issue. Because you got to think about it. Most fear is really irrational. If it's not a grizzly bear chasing you down, there's no reason to be afraid. What are we afraid of? Are we afraid of famine? Are we afraid of war? Poverty? You got to ask yourself, like I said earlier, one of my biggest fears is poverty. I don't want to be homeless on the side of the street. But if I let that consume me to where I'm living in anxiety all day, I'm actually attracting that to myself. So I got to stop and say, hey, wait a minute. Have I ever not been able to pay my bills? Have I ever not been able to eat? No, I've always found a way to make it happen. So I've always found a way to have, and I'm always thankful and appreciative that I've always eaten, or I've always had a roof over my head. I always was safe for the most part, So, I've had times where I struggled, where I'm like, damn, I can only get the avocado and the small piece of salmon, but I can't get the potato with it. I've had times like that where I can get the potato with the salmon, but I can't get the avocado. I guess I'll just go with the avocado and the salmon, I've had times where I'm like, damn, a can of beans with tuna fish for dinner. I've had those times. But guess what? I ate and made it happen, And it actually gives you perspective. Like, dude, okay, if it comes down to it, and I'm digging in my pocket and I'm down on my last cent, I'm pretty confident I can do what I got to do. So look, man, was I afraid was I afraid when I had that time in my life? I actually was, but the fear was a low level fear. It wasn't like, the fear was mostly, damn, how am I going to pay my rent? I wasn't really afraid as much about getting something to eat, because I was doing intermittent fasting and I was on a caloric deficit. But mostly my fear was, am I going to be able to pay my rent? And I remember feeling anxiety. But the fear of that was totally irrational and a big waste of my time, because not being able to pay my rent wasn't going to kill me. It wasn't a life or death situation. And me not being able to pay my rent was just going to force me to have to choose some other options, to go somewhere else. It wasn't, oh, I can't pay my rent, so I'm going to be out in a cardboard box or a tent on the street. That was an option, but I had other options besides that. I just had to pack up and go. So fear is just an illusion, because if I think back to me being afraid of not being able to pay my rent in Southern California, what is me worrying about not paying my rent how is that gonna help me pay the rent? For one thing, that type of worry, all it does is zap energy from you, because you're in a negative mind frame. So you're causing all this fear, which what I was doing was causing a lot of fear for no reason, which the fear was just lowering my energy, lowering my vibration to the point where I probably missed opportunities that could have gotten me much further. I was working a sales job at the time, and all that worry and frustration, all that unnecessary worry and frustration was probably hindering my numbers, because my numbers started to dwindle, And so hindsight is always 20/20, because when I think back on certain situations from the past, and I think about certain relationships that I had with people and opportunities, I say, you know what? I probably could have done such and such, and I could have made it. Or if I would have done this, that, and the third, I could have opened up an opportunity in this area of work. There's just too many to count. There's just so many of those thoughts and situations, like what ifs or I could haves. And then I think about it, I'm like, Well, why didn't I do it? Where was my mindset? My mindset was on scarcity. My mindset was on, oh, I got to pay my rent right now. I think I'm somebody who does think big. I'm kind of a dreamer. Like, I think bigger than a lot of the people that I know, like aspirational wise. Like, I want to strive for greater things, almost to the point where it seems unrealistic to a lot of the other people that I know. Like, that's unrealistic. But I don't care. I'd rather be unrealistic. I just feel better that way. I'd rather, because I might mess around and find out, and you ever have those times where you just feel like you're on point and you're in a flow state because it's everything you do is just clicking and you're firing on all cylinders. And that's because you're in a high vibrational state because you are taking care of yourself. You're eating the right foods. You're exercising and treating your body right. You're going to sleep at a reasonable hour so that you can get the rest that you need. You are being respectful and loving towards other people because that's greater. That's better for the greater good. You're being more understanding of others and yourself. And you start to notice everything begins to come together. You might be in a rough time right now, or you might be slipping a little bit. And you might recognize, damn, you know what? I got to get a grip. I got to get back on the right path. I got to stop eating these cookies and cakes every day and these ice creams. Or I've been drinking a little bit too much. I got to cut it out, and I got to get back on the gym, and I got to start, going for jogs again, or I got to start doing my workouts again. You know what? I should start reading again. I should start reading that book that I bought 6 months ago that I just read 2 chapters. I should start working on my business again like I was doing before. I should make amends with somebody who I had a falling out with. I should admit that I was wrong about something. I should apologize to somebody. I should reach out to somebody who I've been meaning to reach out to. There's all kinds of things that we should do that we don't do. Because we live in a procrastination day and age. There is a lot of demand on our attention. There is a lot of responsibilities that us human beings on planet Earth need to attend to. And I think what happens is we allow the burdens of life to get to us to a certain point where we start to feel like we need some sort of relief, some sort of a release pressure valve or something, to where we could just, okay, I got to unwind. After all the stress and turmoil of the day, I just need to watch this Netflix and relax with a Ben and Jerry's. Or I need to smoke this L and have a drink or have a glass of wine. Maybe it's the need. Maybe it's the need that's causing so much of the turmoil and so much of the unnecessary stress. Why the need? Why can't we just live life? Why can't we just wake up in the morning with tons of energy without needing a cup of coffee? Why can't we just eat all natural, healthy food and not need to feel like we need cookies and ice cream and cakes? Why do we feel like we need this stuff? Because these things get inside of you. Think about it. Anything that you consume becomes a part of you and then controls you. Now, I like to bash fast food a lot, but think about what happens when you eat it. It is scientifically engineered for something that they call the bliss point. The bliss point is something that scientists have come up with to make it taste as best as it possibly could, to trigger the addiction of the person coming back for more. So, whatever chemicals they put into the food to do this, you got to understand, taste and things like this are nothing to play with, because it sends a signal to your brain like, oh, I'm getting something very, very good and very important. I need to make sure I can get that again. So it's not like you just eat, let's say the most popular I'm not even going to name any names, but the most popular fast food restaurant. You eat it and you're like, yeah, I'll just eat one and never eat it again. No, your brain gets wired each time you eat it to crave it every day. You don't you don't think it's ironic that Doritos made a commercial you can't just eat one? There's a reason why you just can't eat one. The same reason why the drug dealer gives you a free sample the first time. Whatever it is that's inside of that is controlling you. And in my opinion, anything that controls you is going to lead you down the path of fear because you're not in control. So the first step is having the understanding of what it's doing. When you consume certain drugs and foods, that's like a parasite entering your body. And the parasite is forcing you. Think about what a parasite does. It eats whatever you put into it, and it makes your body crave the kind of food that the parasite wants. So, parasitic foods, fungal infections. These topics are not really popular because, for one thing, you know what's funny on YouTube? If you mention certain things that go against certain advertisers on YouTube, now they want to throttle your video. And they don't want to, you'll notice the impressions don't go up if you mention certain things. So I'm trying to be careful with what I'm saying, which is crazy because I'm not the type of person that likes to self-censor myself. But hopefully you can read between the lines and try to understand what I'm saying without me saying it blatantly. But in a nutshell, all these things, you got to take in mind everything that's going on in the world. And I'm not talking about political things. I'm talking about just the way the structure in society is set up, especially here in the Western world. I'm talking about the food choices we have, the entertainment choices we have. We have options to just allow ourselves to degenerate, and they make it really easy for us to do so. So, by choosing not to do some of these activities that I just stated, and doing the opposite and getting in nature and exercising, educating yourself, reading books, cultivating good relationships with people, start to heighten your awareness and you start to heighten your understanding. And I feel that that's going to be one of the main things to help people eradicate the fears that they're feeling. But the first step is to realize that your fears are really irrational. They're really illusions. Most of them are, unless you're being chased by a grizzly bear. And then understand that there's different levels to fear and all the other emotions that go along with it. There's other emotions that lead into fear. They all build on each other. But you don't want to feel fear when you don't need to feel fear. Unless you need to have an adrenaline rush to save your life. But understand that it's okay if you do feel afraid of something. But realize why you feel it, and whatever it is that is causing you fear, notice your physical sensations. Notice the physical sensations that you have when you feel fear. How does that differ from sensations when you're not afraid, or when you're happy, or when you're excited? And really, really take note of what happens within your body, so that whenever you feel that fear again, you start to be more cognizant of what's going on with your body. And you do things like slow your breathing down. You tend to relax instead of clenching and tightening. You relax your muscles. Because when we're in fear and anxiety and worry, we tighten. And that's why I mentioned doing yoga. You want to loosen up. Stay loose. Because that flexibility and being loose physically is going to make you more loose emotionally. Like, it's no big deal. It's all good. Everything's copacetic or tranquilo. Everything's cool, man. It's okay. Don't worry about it. There's no reason to get upset because anger is on the other side of fear. Anger is just a step up. But if you're feeling too much fear, it actually is a better idea to get a little bit angry because fear is lower than anger. So you have fear and you have anger, which is right here. Now, your anger can turn into fear, but also your fear can turn into anger, which is better than fear itself, because anger spurs you to take action. So there's a purpose for anger too, but this is not a video about anger. But just realize that when you're feeling these kind of emotions, there's a certain spectrum and a scale from one emotion to the other. So have gratitude with yourself, seek knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, and eradicate the fear. I hope these things helped you, anything that I went over. If so, let the algorithm do its job and hit the like button. I appreciate y'all, and we out of here.